Imagine waking up in a town where the dentist is the same guy who cuts hair. The anesthesia is a shot of whiskey. And if you complain too loudly in the saloon, you could get shot before lunch. This isn't a movie, it's Tuesday in the Old West. These are 23 real risks anyone faced just for being alive back then. And some of them will make you grateful you were born in the right century. Number 1. Got shot in the Old West? Your problems were just getting started. The guy calling himself a doctor often didn't have any medical degree at all. He'd lay you down on a wooden table, stick a pair of forceps into the wound, and pull the bullet out while you were fully awake. There were no gloves, no alcohol, nothing was sterilized. The same saw used to amputate one guy's leg would be used on the next patient without even wiping it off. The result: more people died from infection days later than from the actual wound itself. Gangrene was so common that Civil War soldiers were more afraid of the field hospital than the battlefield. If you survived the bullet, you still had to survive the treatment. And honestly, the odds were not on your side. Number 2, imagine a town with no law, no judge, no sheriff. Now imagine your neighbor accuses you of stealing a horse. No evidence, no trial, no chance to defend yourself. Within minutes, a mob has already decided your fate. That happened with alarming frequency in the Old West. Between 1850 and 1900, it's estimated that more than 4,000 people were lynched in the American West. Many of them were completely innocent. All it took was a rumor, a personal grudge, or simply being a foreigner in the wrong town. Vigilante groups would organize and act that same night. There was no appeal, no second chance. The rope was faster than any question. And the most disturbing part, in many of those towns, people saw it as normal, like it was the only way to keep order. The truth is, no one was safe. Not the guilty, and not the innocent. Number 3. It may sound exaggerated, but the biggest killer in the Old West didn't carry a revolver. It carried a glass of water. Cholera, dysentery, and typhoid fever swept through entire towns because nobody had any idea the water they were drinking was mixed with sewage. Wells were just a few yards from latrines and animal pens, and everything ran into the same place. In Dodge City, for example, outbreaks killed dozens in just a few weeks. People would drop everything and run, or simply die waiting to get better. Doctors back then didn't understand the cause. Many blamed bad air or divine punishment. The truth was much simpler and much nastier. Human and animal waste was contaminating the town's only water source. Children were the first to go down, then the elderly. In the end, there were barely enough people left to bury the dead. While Hollywood shows noon duels, the real reality was people dying of diarrhea with no dignity at all. Number 4. In the Old West, coal and silver mines needed small bodies to squeeze into tunnels no grown adult could fit through. Boys as young as 7 or 8 were sent into those dark passageways, carrying dynamite and pushing ore carts that were too heavy for them. They breathed in rock dust for 12 hours straight with no protection at all. There were no laws against it, no inspector knocking on the door, and no one asking where those kids were supposed to be. School was a luxury poor families couldn't afford. If a father died buried in a cave-in or in an explosion, the son would take his place on the very next shift. Many of those boys developed lung disease before they turned 12, and a lot of them didn't make it to 15. They were cheap labor, and nobody cared enough to protect them. Number 5. A toothache in the Old West was a death sentence. There were no trained dentists in those little frontier towns. The person taking care of your teeth was the same guy who cut your hair and sometimes even amputated fingers. The barber would grab a regular pair of pliers, tell you to bite down on a cloth, and yank the tooth out by brute force with no anesthesia at all. If the molar broke in the middle of the extraction, he'd dig around and pull the pieces out one by one while you gripped the arm of the chair. Whiskey was the only painkiller available, and it didn't always work. The worst part came after. With no hygiene and no antibiotics, the infection could take over your jaw in a matter of hours. One simple rotten tooth could turn into a deadly abscess that killed you in just a few days. A lot of people would rather live with the pain than risk their life in that chair. Number 6. Imagine losing everything you own in 2 hours. Your house, your store, your clothes, your documents, all turned to ash. That happened all the time in the Old West. Buildings were made of green wood that dried out fast in the heat. The streets were covered with straw and sawdust, and everyone used open flames for light and cooking. All it took was one lantern tipping over on a windy night, and the fire would swallow whole blocks before anyone could react. There was no fire department, no hydrants, no insurance. Virginia City burned several times. Deadwood was destroyed in 1879. Tombstone lost a big part of its business district twice in less than a year. And the most impressive part, the very next day, those same people would start rebuilding in the exact same place, with the same dry wood. Number 7. When the Civil War ended, thousands of black men headed west, looking for a new life. Many became real cowboys, driving cattle along long and dangerous trails. Historians estimate that 1 out of every 4 cowboys was black. But the official version of history simply erased those people. And the danger wasn't just in being forgotten. There were so-called sundown towns, places where any black person had to be gone before nightfall or face real violence. Lynchings happened, and almost nobody was ever held responsible. The law did not protect the people who needed it most. Bass Reeves, for example, was one of the most effective marshals in the territory, arrested more than 3,000 criminals, and still his name went unrecognized for decades. Freedom existed on paper, but surviving took a lot more than courage. Number 8. Smallpox did not reach indigenous tribes by accident. At several points, contaminated blankets and supplies were deliberately given to native communities. The most documented case happened at Fort Pitt in 1763, when British officers admitted in writing that they sent infected items to spread the disease. The result was devastating. Tribes that had thousands of members were reduced to just a few dozen in a matter of weeks. Those people's immune systems had simply never encountered that virus before. And the worst part is that many military and political leaders knew exactly what effect this would have. Smallpox cleared the way for frontier expansion in a way no army could have done alone. While schoolbooks talk about territorial conquest, the reality involved calculated extermination, and the proof is in the documents from that time themselves. Number 9. Hollywood made us believe that 2 gunfighters would draw in the middle of the street and only one would go down. Looks great in the movies, but the reality was very different. The guns back then had terrible accuracy. Colt and Remington revolvers fired low-velocity bullets that could easily get thrown off by the wind. The result, most shots missed their target. And here's the part nobody tells you. Those stray bullets went through windows, thin wooden doors, hit horses, children, and anyone else unlucky enough to be nearby. Records from towns like Dodge City and Tombstone show that civilians died more often than the duelists themselves. There was no warning. The fight would start, and anyone out on the street could become an accidental target. Walking out of your house on a bad day was basically a lottery. Number 10. This is the side of the Old West Hollywood always hid. In mining towns, saloons did not just sell whiskey. Upstairs, women were kept in tiny rooms, many of them brought there under false promises of work. There was no minimum age, no law protecting anyone. Miners showed up with gold in their pockets and paid pennies. Diseases like syphilis spread unchecked because antibiotics simply did not exist. Pregnancy meant working until you physically could not anymore. Violence was so common that no sheriff even bothered to investigate. And when these women died, they were buried in shallow graves with no name, no headstone, as if they had never existed. In Dodge City, Virginia City, and Tombstone, entire cemeteries hold bodies that were never identified. That was the raw reality behind the saloon doors. Number 11, the gold rush drew in thousands of men with one simple dream: getting rich. But the method used to separate gold from the dirt was a slow death sentence. Miners handled mercury with their bare hands, with no gloves and no protection at all. The liquid metal soaked through the skin and went straight into the bloodstream. Over time, the symptoms started to show: constant tremors, mental confusion, memory loss, and erratic behavior that many people mistook for madness. In mining towns like Virginia City, it was common to see young men shaking nonstop, unable to hold a cup. They called it miner's disease, but nobody understood the real cause. Entire communities were breathing toxic fumes without knowing it. The cruelest part is that most of them died without ever realizing that the very gold they were chasing was what was killing them from the inside. Number 12. Forget that idea that the sheriff was the town hero. Most of the time, he worked for whoever had the most cattle or the most gold. Big ranchers and mine owners bankrolled elections, paid extra under the table, and decided who went to jail and who stayed free. Judges would even hold trials inside saloons, and the verdict depended on who was buying the drinks. A criminal with connections could kill someone and never see the inside of a cell. Meanwhile, an ordinary worker accused with no proof could end up hanged before sunset. There was no appeal, no public defender. If you didn't have money, you didn't have a defense. Justice in the Old West wasn't blind. It could see the size of your wallet just fine. Number 13. Crossing the United States from east to west took 4 to 6 months in a wagon with no suspension. It sounds crazy, but around 400,000 people took on the Oregon Trail between 1840 and 1860. What they faced along the way was brutal. Rivers with no bridges swallowing entire wagons, cholera outbreaks that killed within hours, and storms that turned the plains into impassable mud. Food spoiled, water ran out, and the draft animals simply dropped dead from exhaustion. Entire families died on the journey and were buried right there on the side of the trail. Historians estimate that along certain stretches of the trail, there was one grave every 80 meters. That means the people who kept going were passing graves all day long. The promised land came with a brutal price long before anyone ever reached it. Number 14. Hollywood made everyone believe only native people did this. But the truth is much darker. Settlers, soldiers, and bounty hunters scalped too. And often, several state governments even created payment charts for indigenous scalps. That's right, there was a set price. One amount for an adult man, another for a woman, another for a child. It was an economy of horror, complete with receipts and everything. The territory of Mexico and regions like California and Texas had official reward programs like this. Professional hunters crossed borders chasing that money. And the most disturbing detail, they did not always check whether the scalp actually belonged to an enemy. A lot of innocent people paid with their lives. The real savage in this story was not always who the movies made it seem. Number 15. You'd open a sack of flour and find maggots crawling around inside. And you know what you did? You sifted them out and used it anyway, because you had no other choice. No refrigerator, no preservatives, nothing. Meat was dried in the sun and still rotted within days. Milk went sour before noon. In the mining camps, things were even worse. The diet was basically beans, rancid bacon, and black coffee. Every single day, for months on end. Homemade canned food was a game of Russian roulette. One bad seal on a jar, and you had botulism on your plate. Food poisoning was not bad luck, it was routine. But what really killed people was what you didn't feel right away. Scurvy from lack of vitamin C, chronic malnutrition, intestinal infections that slowly ate away at you. A lot of people in the Old West did not die from a bullet. They died from what they ate for dinner. Number 16. On the Great Plains, winter gave no warning. The temperature could drop to 30 degrees, and the winds turned everything into a deadly trap. Entire families got stuck in sod houses for weeks, burning whatever they had, just to keep from freezing. Cattle froze, standing up, right where they were. But the worst happened in January 888. The morning started out mild, and parents sent their kids to school without heavy coats. Then suddenly, a brutal blizzard hit Dakota, Nebraska, and Kansas. Children tried to make it back home and got lost in the blinding snow. Hundreds died, just a few feet from their own doors. It became known as the Children's Blizzard. There was no central heating, no weather forecast. There was luck or death. And on the plains, luck ran out fast when the sky changed color. Number 17. In the 1800s, getting syphilis was basically being handed a slow-motion death sentence. It started with a small sore that went away on its own. People thought they were in the clear, but the disease was only getting started. Weeks later, rashes would spread all over the body, bone pain, fever, hair falling out, and the worst part came years later. Syphilis attacked the brain. Little by little, the person would lose their mind until they no longer recognized anyone. In the brothels of the Old West, the disease spread like currency, and it did not pick its victims. Wealthy ranchers, respected sheriffs, judges, cowhands, everyone fell the same way. Mercury was the only treatment available, and it was almost as brutal as the disease itself. It burned the mouth, made teeth fall out, and poisoned the body. Many people preferred syphilis over the cure. There was no escape, just a long wait for the end. Number 18. When the wars ended, the government did not send native people home. It sent them to reservations on land nobody wanted. Dry land, no game, no real way to grow anything worth eating. The idea was simple: get them out of the way. The rations the government promised arrived spoiled, or did not arrive at all. Federal agents diverted supplies to sell in local markets while entire families went hungry. Children died of malnutrition just a few miles from prosperous towns. And there was more. The government also took children from those families and sent them to boarding schools where they were forbidden to speak their own language. The official motto of those places was, "Kill the Indian, save the man." It was not battle that nearly wiped these peoples out. It was stamped paper, calculated policy, and indifference. Genocide traded the shotgun for the pen and kept right on working. Number 19. Working in a mine in the Old West meant accepting that any day could be your last. Methane gas built up in the tunnels without anyone realizing it. All it took was a spark from a pickaxe, hitting rock, or a badly placed lantern to turn everything into hell. The explosion killed instantly, but the ones who survived the blast faced something even worse. They were trapped in the dark, with the air slowly running out. Rescue teams took days to get there, and many times they found nothing but bodies. Outside, families camped at the mouth of the mine waiting for any news at all. Accidents that killed 50 or 100 men at once made headlines for a week and were forgotten the next. Mine owners rarely paid compensation. To them, labor was cheap and easy to replace. There were always more desperate people showing up, chasing gold. Number 20. Sending a letter in the Old West was basically asking someone to risk their neck for you. Pony Express riders rode alone through territories controlled by outlaws and hostile tribes, carrying bags full of money, documents, and mail. In less than 2 years of operation, the service lost dozens of men. Ambushes were so common that many mail carriers went heavily armed, and even then, some never made it to their destination. The detail most people do not know is that these riders changed horses every 15 kilometers at isolated stations that were also easy targets for attacks. When a letter finally made it into your hands, it meant someone had survived hundreds of kilometers of pure danger. And if you wanted to reply, all you could do was hope the next guy had the same luck on the way back. Number 21. When the sheriff could not handle things or simply did not exist, the people took matters into their own hands. They formed armed groups that called themselves defenders of order. But in practice, it was organized revenge. In San Francisco, vigilance committees hanged dozens of people with no right to any trial at all. And afterward, they declared themselves heroes. The dark detail is that the targets were almost never real criminals. Immigrants, black people, the poor, and anyone who bothered someone with influence ended up at the end of a rope. It was persecution dressed up as justice. These groups had more power than any outlaw because they acted with the support of the community. No one questioned it. No one investigated. And if you were accused, you had no defense. The line between law and crime simply did not exist. Number 22. Imagine going months without seeing another human being, without hearing a voice, without having anyone to exchange a single word with. That was life for thousands of families who moved into the interior of the Great Plains. Sod houses in the middle of nowhere, days on horseback from the nearest town. The wind howled non-stop. The horizon never changed, and the mind started to break. Doctors at the time documented something they called prairie madness. Women were the ones hit hardest. Some stopped talking. Others screamed for no reason. There were cases of people who simply walked barefoot out into the fields and were never seen again. With no neighbors, no help, no doctor nearby, isolation became a disease as real as any fever. The American frontier did not kill only with bullets and disease. It destroyed you from the inside, in silence. Number 23. In the Old West, thousands of people lived and died without leaving any trace behind. No birth certificate, no death record, not a single written line proving they ever existed. Miners who spent years digging for gold died in cave-ins and were buried right there, with no name on the grave. Chinese immigrants who built the railroads disappeared from the records as if they had never even set foot in this country. Children died of fever before the age of 5, and their parents kept moving because they had no choice. Mass graves along the trails were the most common fate. And who did history choose to remember? The gunfighters, the outlaws, the ones who spilled the most blood. The ordinary person who worked hard their whole life turned into nameless dust. That may have been the most brutal risk of all, to exist and disappear as if nothing had ever happened.